Good evening, everyone. Welcome to York Observatory's TeleTube, the online astronomy and astrophysics program written and presented by the students, faculty, alumni, and friends of York University. We are broadcasting live from the Alan I. Carswell Observatory, located at York University in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. TeleTube broadcasts every Wednesday night at 7:30 p.m. local Toronto time. For any questions or comments you have about our past shows, or if you have suggestions for future topics, please send us an email at observe@yorku.ca. You can also connect with us on Twitter or Instagram with the handle at York Observatory and on Facebook at Alan I. Carswell OBS. I'm Guggen, and I'll be one of your hosts this evening, along with Anita, Kat, Matt, and Prayosha. I'm Anita, Shannon, Amin, and Matt. Tonight, we've got a great presentation about Mars travel, the recent Perseverance mission, and life on Mars. Before we get started with our show, we'd like to give you a little update on what you can see stargazing this coming week. In the southwest, Mars is visible in the early evening, as well as the constellations Orion and Taurus in the south. Keep an eye out for the Orion Nebula, located under Orion's belt, as well as the Hyades star cluster, including the bright red star Aldebaran, which is the bullseye in Taurus. The Pleiades, or the Seven Sisters, are also visible to the right of Taurus. Mars and the Pleiades actually appear very close together in tonight's evening sky. And the double cluster in Perseus is an awesome deep sky find. Try and spot these constellations if you get a chance to stargaze. A pair of binoculars or a small telescope are also excellent options to see some of the deeper space objects, such as clusters or nebulae. Let us know what you can see in the chat below. Now, without further ado, let's get started. Amin will kick us off with a little bit about space travel and exploration.
I will discuss the history of exploration in the solar system, starting with missions to the terrestrial planets, with the closest to the Sun first and going outwards. Mercury is the first planet and is the least explored of terrestrial planets. This is partly due to the difficulty in exploring it, and partly due to the lack of interest. The Mariner 10 and Messenger missions have been the only ones to come close to Mercury. Bepi Colombo is the only currently active mission, having launched in 2018. There is a proposed mission called Mercury P from the Russian Space Agency. Research topics include the core of Mercury, its surface tectonics, and its magnetic field. Venus, in comparison, has had many more missions, a total of 42 as of now to be exact. 38 of those came before the year 2000 from the United States and the Soviet Union. The Soviet Venera program, which launched 16 probes, was the first to have a probe launched to another planet. The first successful probe that went to Venus, however, was the American Mariner 2 craft. It found that Venus has no magnetic field. In 1966, Venera 3 crashed onto the surface of Venus, and in 1967, Venera 4 was able to return data measured from Venus's atmosphere. Orbiters and flybys have also been conducted, with 3 missions currently active. Next, Mars is the most explored planet in the solar system, with 49 missions and counting. Mariner craft were also involved here, with Mariner 4 conducting the first flyby of Mars and Mariner 9 being the first space probe to orbit another planet. In recent times, several rovers have also been sent, but the Perseverance mission will have the first ever helicopter. I will now discuss types of spacecraft. A lander is a spacecraft which approaches a celestial body and actually makes contact with the surface without crashing. This is called a soft landing, as opposed to a hard landing, where the craft hits the surface with too much force and damage is caused. Some spacecraft are actually designed to do this. Early landers even used balloons to cushion their fall and bounce to a safe location. If there's an atmosphere on the target object, the lander must be able to go through the atmosphere. A parachute or sometimes small rockets fired downwards can help to reduce the terminal velocity enough to make the soft landing. Sensors may be used to measure orientation and adjust accordingly to accomplish controlled descent. The lander will then use its landing gear to rest on the hard surface of the object in question. The first landers sent out by humans went to the moon. Other landers have since been sent to Venus, Mars, and some moons of the solar system, as well as comets and asteroids. We watched the last one to land on Mars in our previous episode. In contrast with a lander, an orbiter does not actually reach the surface of the object it is investigating. Instead, as you would guess from the name, it comes into orbit with it. This is also distinguished from a flyby, where the craft does not come into orbit. An orbit is a trajectory which neither falls into the celestial object nor escapes it. Orbiters are constantly falling downward, but the direction of the moon is also changing enough to compensate, resulting in a usually elliptical shaped orbit. Orbiters are used to gather scientific data from high above instead of from the surface. Depending on what the scientists are looking for, they will select the type of craft to use. Some spacecraft will fulfill multiple roles, such as the Cassini-Huygens mission, which did flybys of Venus and Jupiter and included the Cassini probe that studied Saturn from orbit, as well as the Huygens lander that landed on Saturn's largest moon, Titan. Mars, being close to Earth with an easy-to-explore surface, has an especially high number of orbiters. The Soviets and NASA sent 8 orbiters there in the 20th century. Other countries have since joined the list, including now, of course, China and the United Arab Emirates recently. Next up is the exploration of moons. The most famous moon is our moon, of course. An exploration of our moon began in 1959 when the Soviet Luna 2 hit the surface. Prior to that, Luna 1 had done a flyby. NASA's Apollo program landed humans on the moon successfully 6 times. The space race led to a moon race during the Cold War. Several rovers have been sent, and rocks on the moon have been brought back to Earth. The first landing on the far side of the moon, which was unmanned, was done by the Chinese Chang'e 4 mission in 2019. Mars's moon Phobos has had some flybys which took 2 pictures. 2 Soviet and 1 Russian mission were attempted to be launched to visit Phobos, but all of them failed. The other moon of Mars, Deimos, has also been photographed. No landings have been made on either moon. The Martian Moons Exploration, or MMX, will launch in 2024 and will bring back samples from Phobos. Jupiter's moon Europa has been visited by 5 spacecraft, and many more missions are planned. The Galileo spacecraft got several years of data from its mission, and most of what we know about Europa came from Galileo. Saturn's moon Titan was visited first by Pioneer 11 in 1979 and Voyager 1 and 2 later. The Voyager probes allowed us to measure Titan's atmosphere, size, and mass. It also discovered oceans of liquid hydrocarbons, which are also known as organic compounds. The Cassini mission made 125 flybys of Titan, and the Huygens lander touched down on the surface. So why do we explore space? There are several benefits. Economically, other astronomical bodies in space contain vast amounts of resources. If we could mine asteroids or visit certain moons in the solar system, we could tap into some of those resources. Minerals and also precious metals like gold, silver, and platinum can be found on these bodies, and we could potentially mine them and bring them back to Earth. Currently, there are too many problems with the idea to accomplish this. The cost of spaceflight, trouble with identifying suitable asteroids, difficulty with the mining process, and other issues must be overcome first. Perhaps in the future, humans will be able to do so. Several target asteroids have been identified, which were selected to maximize cost effectiveness. Apart from economic benefits, there are scientific discoveries to be made. If we find life on another planet or moon, it would be a great milestone achievement in biology. Mars is one place where we might find current life or evidence of previous life. Finding places suitable for human habitation is another usage of space exploration, allowing humankind to expand out into the solar system. Mars is useful here too, as it is relatively close to us, has a similar mass to the Earth, and the surface conditions are relatively bearable, making it the first choice for the initial step forward. Finally, a lot of the technology developed for space exploration ends up being used on Earth for a variety of purposes. Space exploration provides motivation to create technologies like fire detection, the invention of the pacemaker, CAT scans, LEDs, water purification, and many others.
Well, thank you, for that information. Now, reaching Mars is a hard and unforgiving endeavor with little room for error. A large proportion of the 79 missions launched towards Mars have been lost due to failed components, rocket glitches, or grievous errors that sent probes crashing into the Martian surface or missing the planet altogether. Landing missions are especially tricky to the long time delay between Mars and Earth communications. The thin Martian atmosphere and the fact that the spacecraft and their components must survive several months in space before making it to the surface. We have been very lucky with many landing missions, but not all of them made them down. In total, only a mere 39 missions were successful. With these three missions, specifically the recent missions we have had, the Tianwen, the Perseverance, and Ingenuity. Have been made it to the surface and to the atmosphere of the planet. Um, well, some of them of the 39 missions remained operational till this moment, and there were only two partial successes. Since the 1960s, many nations have tried to either orbit or land Mars, and the first one to succeed actually is the Mariner 4 in 1964, which is the first successful flyby of the red planet. And well, now Perseverance, as I said, along with the with Hope and Tianwen making their way through history, marking a new era to humankind and the discovery of a new frontier. Hundreds of things have to go right for any landing to be a success, and NASA has pinpointed many areas of possible failure. Perseverance will have to transition from going, well, it already did, from going to 12,500 miles per hour or 20,000 kilometers per hour to a pace of a slow walk in just a few minutes. So, in order to do this, it carried out a complex maneuver autonomously due to the fact that it takes approximately 11 minutes for radio signals to travel from Earth to Mars. So the Perseverance mission went on its own to carry out this complex landing. Now, moving on to orbital dynamics and the main challenge when completing these interplanetary missions, how the planets move and orbit the sun dictates launch times. Of course, to save on fuel and time, launches to Mars, for example, are done every 2 years or so. The launch window is different depending on the spacecraft destination, but we will stick to Mars for this example. A trip to Mars takes an average of about 9 months. However, Perseverance, Tianwen 1 and the Hope probe were all able to arrive within a little over 6 months from the late July launch date. This is due to the fact that they launched during a celestial alignment of Earth and Mars known as the opposition. Because of the fact that Mars and Earth came so close to each other, which only happens around every 18 years, by the way, other oppositions happen around every 26 months, hence the 2 year launch gap. But every 17 years is actually when Mars becomes much closer than the other close encounters, which is the reason, again, why these three missions were able to make it in a much shorter period than average. Now, if spacecrafts were launched at Mars' closest approach in a straight line, at the average speed capable by modern propulsion systems, they would arrive within around 80 days, 88 days, or a little less than 3 months. The problem with this method is that the amount of fuel needed to keep accelerating towards their desired target is, well, it's a lot. And since if a spacecraft were to travel in a straight line, the effects of gravity of the planet it launched from will keep it pulling towards it, increasing the amount of energy required by the spacecraft. And no mission has traveled using this method, and most of the spacecraft actually follow something called a Hohmann transfer. This maneuver was named after Walter Hohmann, a German scientist who proposed this method in a paper from 1925. The way this maneuver works allows for the minimum amount of propellant to be used. Uh, for example, suppose that the Perseverance capsule started off in a circular orbit around Earth, near the orbit of the International Space Station. In order to set a course to Mars, a set time and location of the capsule in orbit is specifically calculated by the mission command. At the given set time and location, the capsule uses its engines to speed up and change its orbit into an elliptical shape. Also, please note that when an object is in orbit, it requires no propulsion to stay there. So engines can be shut off once a desired stable orbit is achieved. Once the capsule fires its engines in order to speed up to the desired calculated velocity, the shape and direction of this elliptical orbit is determined, and the orbit allows for interception with the red planet. But why would we want to go there? Could we actually live in Mars? Shannon will help us on that matter.
Well, thank you, Matt. So, if there does come a day where humans reach Mars, there would have to be a place where we can live and thrive, a Mars habitat. A Mars habitat is a building/slash structure that allows humans to live on Mars. Now, for centuries, there has been speculation about whether or not humans would one day live on Mars. As the years progress, it's become evident that living on Mars will one day not only be a thought for science fiction. However, this task is very daunting and expensive. In the 2010s, it was predicted that it would cost over $2 million for a single brick to be on the surface of Mars. Today, we know how to use 3D printing to create structures on Earth. Maybe we can use this idea for structures on Mars too. Whatever kind of structures we build on Mars must be able to support human beings. The structure should be able to withstand Mars' cold temperatures, but also maintain an environment that allows for human life. The structure has to shield humans from intense solar radiation from the sun and provide breathable air. Mars will not be that easy to live on because of the fact that, in addition to unbreathable air, Mars has temperatures, radiation, and wind much more extreme than that we see on Earth. Some believe that travel and settling on other planets is the way forward for humankind. And there are several groups that are working toward a human civilization on Mars, such as SpaceX and NASA. There's even a company that has created almost a plan and a vision of what they want a Mars habitat to look like. A New York architecture company known as AI Space Factory is designing a habitat which they called Martia. The design has an egg shape and was made as a submission for NASA's 3D printed habitat challenge. The challenge was designed to allow companies and researchers alike to create an advanced construction technology that was able to be sustainable for usage on Earth and beyond. Martia, in particular, was created to be a Mars habitat. AI Space Factory actually built a replica of the habitat on Earth, with it being one-third of the size. The company took first place in the challenge. Is this a house you would want to live in? Marcia's team constructed a replica structure that was 2 stories tall and was only, as I said earlier, a third of the size of the actual structure they planned to build on Mars. The full Marcia structure is actually 800 to 1,000 square feet and 4 stories tall. It can house 4 astronauts for up to 2 years. The structure resembles an egg standing on one of its tips, and is made by using components on Mars, rock, and dirt with a little bit of plastic like polymer. The CEO of this company and also the founder, David Mello, decided that he wanted the plastic that would be in the structure to actually be a renewable bioplastic, which is called polylactic acid. The plastic is actually extracted by natural materials such as corn and sugar on Earth, but the plastic is thought to be able to be also produced on Mars. Once the mixture is made, it can be used to build the walls of Martia. Very high temperatures are used to make this polymer mixture. The polymer mixture is actually 2 to 3 times stronger than concrete and 5 times more durable, which means it will actually be able to put up to the harsh temperatures and radiation of Mars. Now, you may be wondering, how are they going to put this great structure on Mars? The AI Space Factory has outlined a plan to send a robot up to Mars to actually create the structures by using 3D printing. This would use a vertically telescoping arm which be attached to a rover in order to build a structure. The Perseverance rover that landed might be a forerunner of the technology needed for this 3D printing rover. Once completed, the Mars habitat will actually have 4 different levels. The first level would have airlocks, which would allow astronauts to enter and exit without there being too much of an oxygen release. The second level would be in the kitchen area. The third level is actually where the sleeping pods and the washroom is. And finally, the fourth level, which personally is my favorite, is the recreation and exercise area. Now, what makes this level my favorite is that it actually has very large windows, will allow the astronauts to see the Mars landscape. Living on Mars would actually be pretty difficult. Imagine living in a place that's completely alien in every way. Although Mars is able to solve the habitable problems of living on Mars, there also comes another issue that needs to be solved: the psychological and physical challenges that people would have to face living on Mars. Amazingly, a habitat was actually constructed to overcome the challenges that be put on astronauts when they try to live on Mars. This habitat is called high seas. This habitat, known as high seas, or the Hawaii Space Exploration Analog and Simulation, is located on Hawaii's biggest island in a very abandoned quarry. The purpose of this habitat was so that researchers were able to see how humans would perform mentally in a space such as Mars. The location was perfectly picked by researchers because it actually looks similar to Mars, as it is a red volcanic landscape with little to no plant or animal life. On this landscape lies the lab, a geodesic dome. The astronauts who partake in this study actually try to live their everyday life as real astronauts. That includes their meals, exercise, lab experiments, sleep, and even try to simulate walking on the Mars surface. With this, they even recreate the delay in communication that would be faced by people on Mars trying to talk back to colleagues on Earth. They used a 20-minute delay, which for real Mars settlers would be due to the time travel of radio signals traveling between Mars and Earth. The study has allowed astronauts to realize that living on Mars is actually not as easy, as the stress is very much different. During the study, you could actually just open the door and you're still on Earth. Yet on Mars, it is difficult to travel back to Earth. The research and study continue to proceed as they try to show how humans might be able to live a life on Mars. Although there's been so much research done and prototypes made, the real question seems to still remain unanswered. Could humans actually thrive on Mars? NASA's chief scientist, Jim Green, told USA Today that it would be absolutely be possible for humans to live on Mars. Mars has always been questioned as an alternative area for humans to live on because Mars has a surface that is friendlier to humans than many other planets in the solar system, and it's very nearby too. With this, Mars is a very fascinating planet. There's so much natural beauty on it. For example, there is a canyon called the Valles Marineris that measured the entire width of Canada, and Mars has a volcano the size of Arizona. Green says there's a plan to send humans to Mars by 2040, but it's dependent on how many different types of factors. As I mentioned earlier, there are several obstacles about putting someone on Mars. Green says that firstly, we're going to be able to land on Mars. Currently, there's only been 1-ton vehicles onto the surface of Mars. However, for there to be a human on Mars, they will have to put 10 tons onto the surface. This situation will be a little bit different to the other vehicles that NASA has put on Mars. For example, this vehicle has to be landed with more precision, nowhere near the mountains, hills, or large rocks, because this vehicle would be holding human life. The second issue that Green points out is that the main thing is not that we're able to just go on Mars, but that we should be able to return as well. Green also explains that living on Mars is a little bit difficult unless you have a very sturdy habitat. You would need to be wearing a protective suit pretty much all the time. This means that even if we did have a very sturdy habitat, every time you would want to go outside, you would have to put on a full suit to protect yourself. The suit would have to protect you from the low air pressure of Mars and allow for a good supply of oxygen. Another challenge that Green believes we will overcome is that humans will have to get used to the environment of Mars, including the dust storms. Dust storms on Mars are made up of a very fine dust that can get caught up in the atmosphere, which can cause the daylight to decrease and the storms can last for months. The last challenge that Green believes humans will have to go through is what I mentioned earlier: we would have to build an entire habitat. In this habitat, we would need to be able to farm and have a very sturdy food source, which is what Anita will explain next.
Thank you, Shannon. So, for humans to live on Mars, there has to be a sustainable and a sturdy food source, and it would take a lot of work to produce food on Mars. We might actually have to make a habitat for the growing food that is similar to the Mars habitat. Because think about it, for plants of Earth to survive on Mars, they're going to have to be under Earth like conditions. Under this habitat, the food would need to be pressurized, heated, and have a certain amount of light to be able to thrive. There is not really an atmosphere on Mars and it is very cold. This means that the space or land to grow food on is one of the important factors. The more usable lands that you have, the more food you can make, and the more people can live on Mars. The important question that you may be wondering is what food sources will be well suited to grow on Mars? In the past, it was assumed that plants would be the main food source, but ultimately, through several research projects, they looked away from plants and more into protein sources. They looked at what is being done on Earth and found that insect-based foods were actually extremely efficient for Mars and food produced from cellular agriculture. By using cellular agriculture, we would be able to make meat from cells in large bioreactors. So this is how it works. You take cells from an animal, for example, a chicken, extract the cells, and you pretty much grow them in a nutrient solution, which is usually done in a big stainless steel tank. Afterwards, from there, they try to get the texture right so that it resembles the actual meat. This process is a very sustainable way of producing proteins and it is more ethical. Getting more knowledge on such a procedure will make it much easier to have well-adapted food on Mars. So, what does this future of a Mars citizen's diet would look like? Well, it's pretty simple. There would be plants that are grown indoors, insect products, and cellular agriculture products. Currently, there's actually a little garden for astronauts in space so that they're able to grow their own foods, such as pepper, tomatoes, and simple garden vegetables. Researchers claim that this is actually very valuable for the astronauts so that they can get vitamins, and it is also psychological benefit for them to be able to grow their own food. The gardening allows for a resemblance to life on Earth. However, there is going to be more dense vegetables such as corn, wheat, and soy that could help a growing population on Mars. Usually, when we assume a garden, we think of a greenhouse on Mars, although Mars doesn't have the right amount of sunlight for most crops. Some might think that this is most likely for these plants to be grown in underground tunnels. Also, any gardener would know that the main thing about gardening is the water. Scientists have said it is actually pretty easy to extract water because Mars is mostly locked up in ice, clay, and salt. Even in the current space stations, around 97% of the water is actually reused. So, although it can be challenging to get the water at the first place, once we do find a reliable source, we're all set. After much discussion and research, we can now say that water does exist on Mars. One of the first pieces of evidence to suggest that water presently exists on Mars came from the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter. The MRO discovered something called gullies. These are landforms left behind from flowing water and they are very similar to the gullies created on Earth. Now, you might be thinking, how do researchers know these are recent? Well, the gullies didn't exist in images taken 10 years prior, so they must have formed within that time. If this were to be true, this would mean that water exists underground on Mars and can exist in liquid form at the surface for at least a brief period of time. However, for more recent research and simulations show that these types of landforms may also be a result of flowing sand and not actual water. How they actually formed may remain unknown for now. In addition to these gullies, There is more definitive definitive evidence that water exists on the surface. Recent spectroscopic observations show the presence of hydrogen on Mars at much higher levels than researchers predicted, especially around poles and at high altitude regions of Mars, like mountains. Most of this water is actually frozen. Mars' North Pole is home to polar ice cap made up of frozen carbon dioxide or dry ice and frozen water. This is the only place on Mars where water is visible at the surface. The Martian South Pole also has an ice cap that is mostly made up of ice water, but covered completely in a thick layer of carbon dioxide ice. But is there more to these polar ice caps than what we can see with our eyes? In 2018, new data from the Mars Express Orbiter and European Space Organization made a very interesting finding. The Mars's radar on the Mars Express detected a water lake about 1.5 kilometer below the surface of South Polar ice cap. In 2020, further research and observations confirmed this discovery and actually discovered 3 more smaller lakes around the first one. The first lake is approximately 30 kilometers across and is the first example of liquid water existing stably on the surface of Mars. Since liquid water is very unstable on most of the Martian surface due to the pressure and temperature conditions, scientists believe that this lake would need to have large concentration of magnesium and calcium salts to remain liquid. While it is difficult to determine the chemical properties of this lake, other research has shown that the temperature on Mars at South Pole is too cold for water to exist in the liquid state. The temperature on the South Pole usually sits at around negative 70 degrees Celsius. For comparison, a cold winter night in Toronto can usually sit about negative 10 to negative 15 degrees Celsius. And the coldest temperature ever recorded on Earth is about negative 90 degrees Celsius at a research base in Antarctica. Given that this lake is shown to be liquid, there are larger implications for this discovery. Well, for this lake to remain liquid, researchers posit that a possible heat source is a subsurface magma source, a magma chamber underground beneath this lake. For such a magma chamber to exist, it must mean that magma flow in the mantle of Mars and surface volcanism must have been active fairly recently. While these deep subglacial lakes are probably inaccessible to any manned mission because of their location in the poles, they do provide some insight into other possibilities for water existing on the surface of Mars. Other locations with possible water ice glaciers, such as mountains or craters, would be more reasonable locations to consider when thinking of a water supply.
Thank you, Anita. So, as is well known, Mars is essentially the exploration goal of humankind. We've talked a bit about the future and how humans can live on the red planet. But how are we working towards getting there now? Take the Lunar Gateway and Artemis programs. These are important missions for not only science and research, but as stepping stones for long-duration deep space exploration. With astronauts residing in orbit around the moon for 90-day missions at a time, we can gain a better awareness of the effects of radiation on astronauts without Earth's magnetic field for protection, which is especially important for Mars, which has an extremely weak magnetic field. The Lunar Gateway also provides a sort of outpost that enables resupplying and refueling of ships before interplanetary travel, not to mention efficient communication. Due to the limited gravity and lack of atmosphere on the moon, similar to Mars, many tests there will further have the opportunity to be completed on Mars thanks to the Gateway that, if successful, will carry through to Mars missions, including electric propulsion. In essence, the upcoming moon missions will thoroughly prepare us for Mars missions. Something interesting about the Lunar Gateway is that, aside from its significance as preparation for Mars missions, it is an extremely international endeavor, with such agencies as NASA, the Canadian Space Agency, the European Space Agency, and JAXA working with SpaceX. The Canadian Space Agency is actually contributing the Canadarm3 as built by MDA, an autonomous arm that is shorter and more dexterous than seen before, alongside a secondary, smaller arm to assist in the capture of spacecraft, repair of the gateway, and relocation of materials, among other critical functions. The Lunar Gateway isn't the only current goal leading to Mars missions. NASA is, at present, designing the Space Launch System, or SLS, an incredibly powerful super heavy lift rocket. True to its name, it can carry massive payloads and energy, and it enables deep space travel of both cargo and crew, starting with Artemis missions and hopefully Mars missions. And other robotic space missions beyond Mars will follow. SpaceX has similarly built and is testing another super heavy lift rocket created for such deep space missions as those to Mars, known as Starship. Starship is reusable, as SpaceX rockets are, and will use methane and oxygen for fuel. You may have actually seen a lot of news recently regarding Starship tests, the most recent of which was the high altitude test. And unfortunately, this Starship SN10 exploded shortly after landing. The kinks are being worked out such that the goal of Starship can be achieved: to send satellites, cargo, and crew to the Moon and to Mars. Now, a bit more about the rover of the hour, Perseverance. Perseverance, about the size of a car, is the largest Mars payload ever. It literally weighs a ton, on Earth that is. After landing, the rover will search for signs of ancient life and gather samples to eventually be returned to Earth. The mission will use similar hardware to that of the 2012 Mars Science Laboratory mission, which landed the Curiosity rover, but it will have certain upgrades included that include improved rover landing accuracy. Perseverance is sent to perform numerous and incredible scientific observations to allow us to better understand the desolate Martian environment and to prepare for a crewed mission to Mars. Compared to some of the older Martian rovers like Curiosity, Spirit, and Opportunity, which all scientific instruments use to analyze the surface of Mars and learn about its geology, Perseverance will be equipped with some newer, cutting-edge scientific equipment. All rovers essentially have a large variation of cameras, spectrometers, and radiation detectors, and many of them essentially have their own mini weather station for atmospheric studies. When combined, the data these sensors send to scientists is astounding. It allows for them to learn so much about Mars without ever stepping foot there. The difference with Perseverance is the greatly improved sensors and scientific instruments that are more fine-tuned for detecting ancient microbial life that may have existed many years ago, which may possibly be the first attempt to search for ancient life on another planet. The Mars 2020 Perseverance rover will search for signs of ancient microbial life, which will advance NASA's quest to explore the past habitability of Mars as well. The rover has a drill to collect core samples of Martian rock and soil, then store them in sealed tubes for pickup by a future mission that will hopefully ferry them back to Earth for detailed analysis. Perseverance will also test technologies to help pave the way for future human exploration of Mars. There are several ways that this mission does this, and many ways that it demonstrates technologies that may be used in these endeavors. These include testing a method for producing oxygen from the Martian atmosphere, identifying other resources, such as subsurface water, improving landing techniques, and characterizing weather, dust, and other potential environmental conditions that could affect future astronauts living and working on Mars. The device that is used for collecting Martian soil samples for future detection of microbial life is the sample handling device, shown here on the slide. This device uses a process called sample caching to grab samples of rock and soil from a location that might have promising results. These locations can be identified by the control scientists on Earth that can essentially tell the rover where they want the desired samples from. Perseverance will use a variety of drill bits and tools to grab the sample. These tools are safely stored under the rover's belly. The rover's goal is to grab a minimum of 20 samples to deposit in a well-identified place for future returning missions. The time and place of the deposition is chosen at the rover team's choosing and will be well identified and documented in order to easily be located. Another one of these new and spectacular devices is the MOXIE instrument, which stands for the Mars Oxygen In Situ Resource Utilization Experiment. It is essentially an oxygen generation device used to demonstrate the ability of converting the abundant carbon dioxide into breathable oxygen for future crewed missions. Its main goal is to produce oxygen from the carbon dioxide-rich atmosphere of Mars for our sustainability. Carbon dioxide makes up about 96% of the Martian atmosphere, while oxygen is only around 0.13% compared to the 20% oxygen composition here on Earth. MOXIE will demonstrate that its mechanism and its technology is suitable to generate sufficient oxygen for future Martian astronauts to breathe. The device itself is small, as shown on the right. However, similar devices in the future may be around 100 times larger. MOXIE can also be used to prepare liquid oxygen propellant for returning spacecraft. Of course, some more features on Perseverance. There will also be numerous microphones, cameras, computers, and communication devices that will all work together to accomplish the rover's mission. If you haven't already, I would definitely recommend listening to the first sounds of Mars from Perseverance's microphones. They really are incredible. They're so surreal. Next, Percy's best friend came along for the ride. Strapped to the rover's belly for the journey to Mars was a technology demonstration, the Mars helicopter Ingenuity, which, if it works, will be the first powered flight on the red planet. This is a never-done-before operation, and the results from a successful flight will provide astounding images and scientific data. The Ingenuity helicopter will work closely with the Perseverance rover to gather very important data for close proximity terrain mapping. It will help Perseverance plan its routes safely. The helicopter is equipped with 2 counter-rotary blades revolving at about 2,400 revolutions per minute. Although the craft only weighs 1.8 kilograms, the extremely high-powered blades are necessary to compensate for the lack of atmosphere on Mars. The scientists at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory have really thought of everything and have created an ingenious design. The aircraft will fly on short intervals of around 90 seconds due to its small battery life, which is no small feat compared to the 12-second flight of the Wright brothers. Ingenuity will be the first example of flight on another planet, and it will be a huge stepping stone, a major accomplishment. Well, everyone, you have been listening to the Alan I. Carswell Observatory's weekly TeleTube broadcast, the astronomy and astrophysics program written and presented by the students, faculty, alumni, and friends of York University. If you enjoyed tonight's episode, feel free to learn more by checking out our Perseverance Mars Landing event episode from February 18th. The link will be posted in the description below. The hosts this evening have been Anita, Gagan, Shannon, Amin, Matt, and myself, Noah. Make sure to leave any comments or questions in the comments section of the video below and talk to us in the chat right now. We will be around for the next 20 minutes or so to answer your questions. All of our programs are free, but if you would like to make a donation, please see our website at observatory.info.yorku.ca. You can always connect with us on Instagram and Twitter with the handle @YorkObservatory, as well as on Facebook with the handle @Alan I. Carswell Obs. And check out our website for show notes, content, updates, and contact info, again at observatory.info.yorku.ca. Thanks for tuning in. Clear skies and have a good night.